Welcome to the Joypunk podcast. I am Jenelle Etzel, your host. My guest today is Stephen Green. Currently, he sits as the Executive Director for Business for a Better Portland. Stephen is a startup mentor, a founder of Pitch Black, a pitch competition that gives Black entrepreneurs a platform to connect with the broader startup ecosystems around the country, while also giving them money to grow. Stephen has served in leadership positions at several companies, including WeWork. He describes himself as a Latino, spreadsheet jockey, entrepreneur, author, recovering banker, and VC, working tirelessly to support underestimated founders. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited that this is happening. I know you and I are both really passionate about getting business owners to understand the difference between working in the business and on the business. Can you define this for our listeners and why you think it's so important?
Yeah. I think one of the things we both know about being an entrepreneur is it always starts with an idea or a problem you want to solve. I have yet to see a founder go and say, if I could only manage 40 people, like that's what I'm trying to build is I want 40 people underneath me. I'm not touching the project. And so what that leads people to really have their eye on is how to make coffee, how you roast beans, but they're not thinking about costs of goods sold, what my competition is doing, how am I marketing myself, who are my customers, what's their annual income, and how far do they travel to come to my business. And so that's something that I really focus on as someone who prides himself in operations and process and strategy of helping someone go and navigate the world of, all right, you make great coffee, you know how to roast the beans. Now let's understand what that means for how you build your business around that and separate yourself and understand where you sit in the rest of the marketplace with your competition.
Yeah, I think that's so important to step out because when we're working in the business, we're operating as an employee. We're doing a task, right? And until we step out and then look at it from that view, that's really when we put our entrepreneurial hat on and like, wait, how can I do this? How can I work on the system to get better results? You've worked with so many local businesses here in the Northwest. And I know you're the founder of Greener Pastures Northwest, so you help businesses with strategy, operations, and financial consulting. What led you to this work? What's your background?
Yeah. So my degree's in economics. I was a kid while my friends were collecting baseball cards. I was making my own grids and spreadsheets of my baseball cards and what they were valued at a given point in time. I managed multiple lemonade stands with my neighbors and the other neighbor kids. But I think that was both a result that both my parents were entrepreneurs. So mom, software engineer, had a technology startup here in the 90s. Dad, high school dropout, but turned that into a successful career in the military. And then once he left the military, he worked in technology here, doing HR for companies like Intel. And so being at home, seeing both parents, do their entrepreneurial thing, it was natural that me and my brothers followed suit as well. And so for me, I fell in love early after college, working in the financial sector, hearing about people's backgrounds and balance sheets. I fell in love with business and hearing about how people started their businesses and what they wanted to do with them. And then I found that my skill was in looking at numbers and plans and strategies and helping them be able to accomplish what they want to get to.
And you're somewhat having been in business now for over 20 years in Portland. It seems like when I entered into the field of business in Portland, you immediately meet Stephen Green. I just love that you show up for the community and you've been a consistent advocate and put yourself in places of such service for us as a city. I think the first time I met you was either indirectly through the PDC, Portland Development Commission, or Albina Bank. Can you talk a little bit about your work there?
Again, recovering banker. And so I loved working with small businesses, local businesses where, people were talking about the thing they came up with at their dinner room table with their partner. And now it's something that's serving people in their neighborhood or the state or the world. And then be able to be assistance to them. And so while I was at Albina, one of the last Black-owned banks here on the West Coast, it was amazing to be so close to community and be of service to community. I remember Bob McKean, the president, when I interviewed for a job there, he said, "Where do you volunteer in Northeast Portland?" Not do you volunteer in Portland, but where do you volunteer in Northeast Portland? That really said a lot to me about the organization and where it was focused. And then pivoting over to the city, I really never saw myself working at city. I was on a committee for the city talking about economic development. And I got into a kind of an argument with a woman that worked there. And she was like, "Well, maybe you should come join us and do something about it." And I was like, "Well, maybe I will." And then like a month later, I found myself working at Prosper. And then I was there almost 10 years working with small businesses and doing real estate development projects.
It is so cool. Well, thank you, because the Portland Development Commission is the primary reason, probably the only reason that I was able to buy a building myself when I first started Living Room Realty about 16 years ago. And Rosalind Hill, which is a very prominent
Queen of Alberta.
Queen of Alberta. What a fire and energy. And I mean, I love that she was like, "Okay, I'm going to help this neighborhood, and here are the rules.
Yep.
If you lease from me or you buy from me, no bars on the window.
Yep.
We're telling the community that we're open for business." And I was a tenant of hers, and then she gave me the opportunity to buy. And it wasn't that she just said, "Hey, you want to buy the building?" and then, walked away. She was like, "You want to buy the building?" And then she wound up connecting me to Fred Atimo, a PDC, and really going through the steps and even negotiating with me when it came down to the value to make it possible for me as a small business owner to be able to buy in. And it was amazing to me, because that's the first time that I realized, like, there are grants, there is help here in the city, but it's hard when you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So I imagine that's such a big part of your job and the reason that you're everywhere in the city, right? Because you're just telling people.
Yeah, no, I think I've always said being an entrepreneur means you're smart enough to know something's a good idea, but dumb enough not to say no. Because if you know too much, you'll be like, "Why would I leave my good job where I get a paycheck every 2 weeks for something where I may lose money?" That makes no sense. And so what ultimately ends up is people are like, "I got this thing that's got to exist. And maybe it only exists for 2 months or 2 years or 2 decades, but it's got to exist. And I've got to find a way to get that out." And we live in a city where it's your competitors who are the most likely people to help you along the way. So when some friends and I opened the Oregon Public House, a brew pub in Northeast Portland, it was competitors. It was Brian Steelman. It was Kurt Huffman going and showing us, like, rent this, buy that, don't deal with this distributor, make sure you pay for these things, don't skimp out on this stuff along the way. And I think that's, we have the sense of believing in community over competition. And I think that leads to a lot more people being entrepreneurs here than they otherwise might be in another city. So I want to continue to always lean into that. And I think that's part of your tax of living here is helping other people and not only opening other doors, but taking the hinges off the doors for other folks to make sure they get through.
I love that. I always have thought of that as it's just more fun to play with more competitors. Like, I don't want to play soccer against myself, right? Yep. So like inviting people to the field, and it makes us all better players. And it's so true. That's kind of an unspoken way of doing business here, is like, you're going to get a lot of help along the way. And we all expect for you to turn around and give that same help back.
Yep.
It makes it so rich.
Yep.
So you just mentioned the business that you helped start up, Oregon Public House.
Yeah.
Tell us about that, because that's a really unique business model.
Yeah. So post the recession, 2009, 2010, me and 2 other neighbors got together. And one of the realities of a recessionary world in Portland means people have less money for philanthropic efforts, but they drink more beer, right? Because we're sitting at home more times and we're cracking open whatever local brew there is. And so we got together and said, well, what if we could leverage that for philanthropy? And so we started what we call a Philanthrop in 2013, where our slogan's eat, drink, give. And so, you pick something to eat, pick something to drink, and then we donate all of the proceeds from the business to local charities.
Small world, but you all looked at a building that I own on 14th in Alberta to be a tenant, and I wanted you guys so bad, but we didn't have enough room, I don't think. But,
Yeah.
And so is the business still in operation, and where is it located?
Still located right on 7th and Deacon in Northeast Portland in the Village Ballroom.
So you also talk about more ideas that I know that you just had a passion to see come out in the world, and that has got to be Pitch Black PDX.
Yeah.
That is it's so cool. Please share with our listeners about that organization.
Yeah, so Pitch Black started back in 2015 after I was reading some census data that said Oregon was home to more than 3,000 Black businesses. And I'm a man about town. I thought I knew a lot of Black-owned businesses, but clearly I knew none. At the very same time, the show Shark Tank was really, really popular. And so above our brew pub is a venue space. And so I figured, well, let's throw a party for some Black-owned businesses and see what comes of that. Shaped it like Shark Tank, but instead of stuffy VCs picking who's investable and who's not, the audience gets to choose the winners. And so we have 5 people that identify as women, 5 people that identify as men, get up, pitch their ideas, and then the audience goes and picks the winners. And so we've done it 7 times here in Portland, 3 times in Austin, twice in Seattle, twice in Philadelphia. And here in Portland, we've had 68 people pitch. They've gone to raise over $55 million for their businesses.
Wow.
And last year, we did our event in Beaverton. Actually, it was our largest one. It's now the largest event for Black businesses, a one-day event in the country. We had over 600 people in attendance, and we were able to give away over $100,000 to the winners that day. So we'll be doing it again in February. It's just a great party, and I love learning about people that are doing really cool things. And so sometimes it's people that have existing businesses, sometimes it's people that have ideas. And so it's just a great way to get people to go and be like, oh, I've got something, I'm working on something. And it's a way to expose people here in the city that there's already people doing things in our community, as opposed to this future idea of, well, if we just put more money into STEM and we do these things, it's like, well, we should do that too. But there's also this person that lives around the corner from you who makes drones or, has a media company and publishes books where Oprah's been an investor, things like that.
I love what you're doing on so many levels. And one of the things I know from talking to some of my friends that are Black and in leadership is one of the most frustrating parts about being in Portland is the narrative that there is no Black community. I would hire more diversity, but we're Portland. Like it's kind of like the story of how white our city is. Sometimes it works against us or is used as a cop out. So to be able to celebrate and see and welcome more of that community in and raise visibility, I love. And then I'm curious, like, what some of your favorite success stories, or how did I not know that these people were here doing this great work?
Yeah, you're right. It's hard to be what you don't see is one phrase that comes to mind. And then confirmation bias is a real thing. So if I start from the standpoint of, I don't think they exist, I'm going to look for things that confirm that for me. Versus when you're faced with the data, as of today, we have more than 6,000 Black-owned businesses in the state of Oregon, and most of those are right here in Portland. Well, if you only know 2 or 3, well, damn, like I've got work to do. There's some things I need to find out about. And so all that leads into other ideas where people tell themselves, well, I'm not in Northeast Portland, so there's no Black businesses near me in Happy Valley or Beaverton. Versus the reality that we're everywhere. We're one of the least segregated cities in the country. And so you can go and find Black businesses in Happy Valley or in Northeast Portland, or I'll be visiting a farmer in Junction City who's got a hazelnut farm there. Once you get people to have that aha moment of they do exist and I'm just not connecting with them, then they can go through that thought process of, all right, what are the things that I'm doing that's keeping me from connecting with those folks? Mm-hmm. And, if I run a company, I talk to a lot of companies around hiring initiatives and what are they doing in the community? And it's like, well, you can go and tell yourself we don't exist because we're not applying, or you can understand more about why people might not be applying for the company that you have. But we do exist, and we are working for other places. We're just not applying here, right? Yeah. And that's a tough conversation for some leadership folks to have at this point in time. Others are like, no, I know it's costing our company money. Like, I know this is a business imperative right now. It's not just a nice to have, but we're literally leaving money on the table because we're not able to bring in a diverse staff and a diverse set of perspectives into our organization.
Through Pitch Black, what are some of your favorite success stories?
Yeah. So year one, our first winner was a guy named Tyrone Poole. And
that's an incredible story.
So when I met Tyrone, I was a banker at Albina Bank, and he was homeless.
Mm-hmm.
And he came in and he wanted to start a daycare business. And he said, I'm already taking care of kids at the place where I'm living. And he was living in a center. And I was like, how do you take kids? He's like, don't worry about it. I watch kids. I take care of them. And what he realized with his daycare business was that in the shelter where he was living, it was mostly women and kids. And most of the women, all the women wanted to have jobs, but they couldn't pay for daycare. And they couldn't pay for daycare because they didn't have jobs. Mm-hmm. And so he just started watching some of the kids so women could go and do interviews and go to work. And that turned into his first business, which was a daycare business, but he was literally homeless himself.
Yeah.
And then through that experience and running his daycare business and really understanding more about the workforce environment here that Oregonians are facing, he came up with an idea for a business called No App Fee, where when you go and you rent an apartment, obviously you pay an apartment fee for every application that you pay. Well, what if you could just pay one of those and you could just do one app and it vets you against thousands of apartments across the state? And so that was his idea. So he pitched that the first year of Pitch Black. He's gone to raise millions of dollars. He's done a TED Talk. He's flown around the world. Now Tyrone's super duper popular, but I knew him back when.
Yeah.
So it's been amazing to see his journey. But that's one example of someone. Jelani Memory, founder of a Kids Co., founder of Circle, grew up in Northeast Portland, went to Bible college, one of the state's most successful tech entrepreneurs.
His dad was one of my jazz instructors growing up. Yeah. Tyrone's work, in the property management, because I own a property management company, immediately it just turned the light bulb on for me what he was trying to do. And I saw how that should just be nationally adopted. That would do so much to radically change the accessibility of housing for folks. And incredible story. Incredible story. Yeah.
Incredible person too.
Yeah.
Paige Hendricks Buckner,
I love
founder,
Paige.
now CEO, doing so many things for people across the country.
Yeah.
Lindsay Murphy, Crazy Aunt Lindsay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So many amazing folks. Anya Halava, a recent winner in the real estate world, the owner of Audrey Development that does multi-family mixed-use development with an impact towards the Black community. Just amazing folks that we've been able to have on the stage.
Just recently, we reconnected. We had hosted at our office at Living Room Realty the Excellence Award, which is to recognize people who are doing great business, but they're doing it in a way that also is just so in alignment with greatness. And that recipient was Brian Steelman, the owner of Porque No. Where did the two of you meet?
We met. I was one of his bankers at Albina Community Bank back in 2006. I think we first met. Mm-hmm. So right when the business initially started. And as much as I love the tacos and the Brian's Bowl, he's just an amazing human, which is disgusting because he's also gorgeous and just super duper affable. And then you find out he's like, yeah, I've been paying $15 minimum wage since like 2010. Got to be there to go and support him. Anything that happened for him, I'll be the first one there.
Question in my mind as I saw you there, and I'm thinking about the history of Brian's first location is in the Boise Elliott Albina neighborhood.
Yeah.
And just 25 years before that, in the early 80s, you could say the area had hit kind of financial rock bottom, and Albina lost over 57% of their populations. Home values dropped to 58% of the city's median, and many homes were selling for half their assessed value. It was a really tough time in that neighborhood, and it was a historically Black neighborhood. And in 1989, just about 25 years before he came to be, absentee landlordism reached a high, and 44% of the homes were owner occupied, and we lost a lot of Black homeowners and a lot of tenants. And unbeknownst to me, that I was definitely a part of that story of gentrification when I moved back to Portland from after college, I moved to Mississippi Avenue. But it was my routine at that time. I would take the number 4 Fessenden bus downtown to work and come back and visit Grandfather's Corner Store. I don't know if you remember Grandfather's Barbecue is on Mississippi. And he'd let me buy a beer or snacks on credit. You know, take a beer, you don't have money, I know you get me back. And his store burned in a fire. And I think it was well-meaning PSU students actually that came back to help him like rebuild. And they were coming from a very, I think, white lens of what the neighborhood wanted. So they were like, yeah, there's some money and we're going to have this panel. And they had advised Grandfather that the neighborhood would really like a deli and an ice cream bar. And how that got translated for him, it felt like here we have 2 really different cultures talking to each other, lost in translation, possibly. I feel like well-meaning white folks kind of ruined what was magic about Grandfather's. Like he probably would have gone on and still been successful had he been able to just reopen the pit roast barbecue and the beer. I mean, he had a business model that was working. Anyway, I'm bringing all of this kind of like history, this like small little personal lens to thinking about Brian Steelman now at Porque No, because that Grandfather spot is where he is now at. And I'm wondering, how do you, as a Black man in Portland, like resolve that tension between seeing someone like Brian Steelman come in and have all of this success and opportunity, and on the other hand, the loss of some of the Black community or Grandfather's barbecue, for example, in this example? Yeah,
one, neighborhoods always change, right? And I think important context of understanding more about that point in time in Northeast Portland is if you go to the 1990 census for the state of Oregon, 80% of the state's Black population lived in zip codes 97211, 97212. That was not a planned thing from a community standpoint where we all got together and said, hey, we all want to live in Northeast Portland. Racist real estate practices, deed restrictions, all these things led to folks only being able to live there by and large, right? So my parents got a house in Beaverton, but the only way they were able to get their house in Beaverton was because we acquired it while we were still in California. And the people that sold it assumed, well, these people work at Intel. So of course they're good white folks coming in. I don't want to over glamorize things, but I also want to like acknowledge, like, if we go back into time and we're standing on Mississippi in 1990, you're going to have a varying degree of we love this. And we've also, we've got some real issues that we really want to fix here. In an ideal world, I wish you could go back to talk to the gentleman and be able to say to them, like, what's your wish? What do you want to do moving forward? What's your vision, right? Maybe he doesn't want to do that. Maybe it's something completely different. And I think this is where it gets in the difference between like DEI work of like diversity is, inviting somebody to the party, right? Inclusion is like when they get to the party, you saying like, what do you want this party to be? What do you want the music that's going to be played? Where do you want us to even hold the party? And I feel like what happens oftentimes with good intentions is we forget about those other things of like, this community already exists. It's already got spheres of influence and people that are leaders in it. Man, let's go and take our energy that we want, but also see if we can earn the trust of the people in those tables that already exist there and see what wonderful things can happen from there. And so I feel like that's the missed opportunity in that circumstance is like meeting that gentleman where he's at and what his dreams and wishes were and understanding what the barriers were getting in the way. That being said, Brian does a ton of stuff for the community.
Right.
And I wish we had more white, Black, polka-dotted people who start and end with community like he does. Right. And I think his resume speaks for itself. Right. And so how do we take more intentionality and think about the positive and negative externalities that come along with just having good intentions or come along with urban renewal or all these other things and have people be part of the conversations as opposed to just being on the menu for the conversations. And so when you say something like, well, the neighborhood wanted this, that in my mind, I go to a specific small number of people that probably don't represent the entire neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
But they're the vocal people that are the neighborhood association.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we know more about those dynamics now than maybe we did back then, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think when Brian started the business, he wasn't thinking in his mind like, oh, I'll remake this neighborhood. He was thinking, man, I have to do something on the cheap. And this area is currently an area that is affordable for the idea that I have.
Right.
Right. And maybe this works, but maybe I'm also out of business in 3 months.
Mm-hmm. Living in that neighborhood, what a really dynamic, fun time to see a lot of people with these new ideas. I mean, that's the rub. And I think we're probably going to see that downtown too. Real estate starts getting cheaper and more innovation moves in and more people can afford to invest and take some risks on those things. And I appreciate your lens on that. And honestly, Brian Steelman and Porcano, like how could you get any better for a community and a street and jobs and opportunity? So sometimes
so many great things. And I think Roslyn is the, potentially the Brian of Alberta Street, right?
Exactly,
on a much grander scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think we'd go and blame Roslyn for the negative externalities that we see today if we were sitting and chatting with her back in the late 80s when she acquired her first property.
Absolutely. Yeah. Being at Albina Bank at that time, helping Porcano, for example, Brian, get started. What do you think, as you look back, that banks could have done a better job of supporting local entrepreneurs? Or what would you like to see banks be able to do more of?
Banking has just changed a lot. So here in Oregon, 40% of the banks that existed prior to 2006 do not exist today. So there's been a huge consolidation of banks. Mm-hmm. The first bank I worked at, US Bank, we had a location in downtown Vancouver. It had a bar in it. And I remember going there for the first day and I was like, man, this looks like a bar. And they're like, yeah. No, it's a bar. And I was like, but it's a bank. And they're like, oh yeah, going back to the 90s, like when the bank would close, the bar would open. And that's how we would find out what was going on with our customers. And you'd be sitting there over beer talking about, payroll and like big customers. Your bank was so much more than just transactions, right? They were your knowledge base in the community. And the branch manager was also the one that made the decision on the loan, as opposed to the banks that we have today where it's pretty much data entry, right? So you go in, maybe you talk to somebody, maybe you don't, but a computer says yes or no. But there is no like, well, why did it say yes or no? Well, that's what the computer said, right? And so we've lost that sense of community banking. Mm-hmm. And the thing I loved about being at Albina was in a given year, Albina, one of the smallest banks in the entire state, we made up about 30 or 40% of the SBA loans to Black-owned businesses in the entire state. That was us. We had that community on lock. And so there's a lot of smaller banks that have specific niches and communities where they have a ton of street cred, right? Mm-hmm. As they've been, consolidated, we're losing that more and more. And so you have larger banks that are like, well, we got good marketing, but, we don't know the difference between St. John's and Concordia, right? We don't know this difference between St. John's and UFP, right? Those being on the other side of the cut is a very real thing in North Portland. If I could wish for one thing from banks, it'd be to go back to that community banking model where you were a hub of the community, not just the one like when someone comes in for a transaction, we'll make sure they get their checks and everything taken care of. Like, no, you knew all the things happening. You knew when a building was going to be rented or someone was leaving or someone was thinking about putting something up for sale. Like they were a real sphere of influence. And that's the thing I miss about the banks that we have, currently working in Portland today. And I think more and more we're seeing some credit unions trying to do that and some other CDFIs. But that's the thing I miss about the big banks that we had before was that community focus.
Hopefully people listening to understand that like where they bank matters.
Yeah, it does.
It matters. And I've seen, whenever things this happens to us in the real estate world too, because we're a financial industry and we're seeing a ton of consolidation. Because when people get a little scared, they want to go towards these like larger, more established institutions working directly sometimes against their values of community and locally owned. And that can be hard for, like for myself as a locally owned business. I'm interviewing a lot of people right now who are interested in coming to Living Room. And one of their first questions is, are you guys going to be around? Because they've seen all the companies my size go away. And my question to them always is like, do you know something I don't? Like I'm here. Like, it does not interest me to consolidate. Like, I'm here because of my passion for community. How would that serve me to go and get eaten up by this larger company where I couldn't do the things I can?
Yeah.
One of the cool things about even the building that we're sitting in right now is it was originally built in 1962 as the Postal Employees Credit Union. And that was started in the 1920s. It's the first credit union in Oregon. And that was started with just a group of people with $5 each.
Yep.
I remember actually it was in my experience working with the PDC and Fred Atimo. They said, okay, we'll give you some financing. Now you've got to find a bank that'll come in and loan you up to half. We'll do the gap financing, but you've got to find a bank. I'm sure you can imagine 2008, the depth of the housing recession, 2009. And I'm calling banks and I'm like, hi, I'm starting a real estate company, and the laughs and the clicks. And so it was Trey, who owns Lewis and Clark Bank. They were a small bank. They saw my track record. They believed in me and they made the loan. Like no large bank's going to do that.
Well, and Lewis and Clark is the last chartered bank in Oregon. So they're the newest bank. Yeah. So the last time we had a bank open in Oregon was 2006, Lewis and Clark Bank. And so I've got a Lewis and Clark Bank story as well. While I was working at the city at PDC, Prosper Now, I helped manage projects in Northeast Portland. And we had some crazy ideas about doing some things on Williams and Vancouver, North Williams and Vancouver, which at the time,
were crazy
ideas, 2008, 2009. And the first new project on Williams was the Hub Bike Bar. And I did the financing for that. And there was this crazy notion that people would pay $700 for a one-room apartment. And like, I remember reading that on a spreadsheet and being like, there's no freaking way people are paying $700 for a one-bedroom in Portland. That's not happening. It ended up being Lewis and Clark. And it was because one of the reasons why I was Lewis and Clark was all the other banks that have been established, they've got loan portfolios. And so one of the things that happened post-recession was the feds came in and made new guidelines for loan loss reserves. So all these banks that had these huge loan portfolios, they had to take cash on hand and put it towards loan loss reserves. Well, if you're a brand new bank that hasn't been doing any loans, guess what you don't have to do? Put money from what you have to loan loss reserves because you don't have any loans that are out there. And so it was amazing doing that project. And I was right. No one was willing to pay $700 for a single bedroom. People paid $800 and it was fully rented out before the certificate of occupancy came through. And so that was the first project on Williams. And now we're looking at $90+ million invested on that corridor between there and Alberta since then, probably, maybe more.
Yeah. Can you give me an example of a credit union here in town that's doing something that you think is pretty innovative about bringing community in?
On Point comes to mind right away. Credit union. CCCU also comes to mind. It's important to understand that credit unions are a different business model, and they're not governed under FDIC legislation. So it's a completely different business model that they're all chartered to serve a certain population, whether it be postal employees or Boeing employees, as we have a credit union here that does that. People should understand that there's more options than just the big four. And currently in the United States, 80% of all deposits reside with the big four banks. So
that's incredible.
Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and KeyBank.
Yeah. We bank with Beneficial. I've been with Beneficial State Bank. They're the highest rated B Corp in the world.
They are. They acquired Albina Community Bank. It all depends on the devil's in the details of the kind of impact that you want to have. Right. And so I love that they're a B Corp. I love how they're looking at their triple bottom line. I would also say they have not recorded an SBA loan to a Black-owned business since they acquired. Albina Community Bank.
Do you hear that, beneficial? You have work to do.
Well, I'm just saying it's all depends on focus, right? And so it's not about just saying like, because you're a B Corp, everything is great.
Yeah.
It's important to understand, like, and this goes back to the context of what we're talking about with community. Wow, we took over a bank that was doing 30 to 40% of all the SBA loans in the state of Oregon for Black businesses. And now we're not going to do this anymore. And if we're not going to do this anymore, wow, we should be providing ways to make sure that that support to those businesses is continuing to happen, even if we're not the ones doing it. So I don't mean it to point shade, but that's a very, if I'm an existing customer who was with Albina Community Bank and I find that out, it's like, wow, that's very different than the bank that we were before. And I think it's an opportunity to come together with the community and say, here are the things that beneficial that we're really, really good at. Man, here are some other ways that we can go support Black-owned businesses or businesses that are in St. John's or whatever, that not going to be the things that we do.
I'm also hearing from my entrepreneurial lens, it sounds like there is a gap in the market to be filled.
Yeah. I mean, I've always got like 3 or 4 businesses looming in the back of my head of starting. You know, a bank is definitely one of them. And so, I hope at a state level, we'll take a look at, going and doing the research around a state bank again. The fact that, we've lost 40% of banks that existed going back to 2000. We haven't had a new one chartered since 2006 in Lewis and Clark. And we've had in the last 10 years a 95% drop in the number of SBA loans to Black-owned businesses in the state of Oregon. And at the same amount of time, the number of Black businesses in Oregon has gone up 3-fold, right? So we got 3 times as many businesses and basically no SBA loans going to those businesses.
And where are they finding financing?
Well, most businesses, and you know this, most businesses don't, right? So nationally, 0.3% of U.S. businesses ever get equity of any kind. 23% of businesses ever get a loan of any kind. So that means 70+% of the time, you're going with the money you got and matching it with this thing called customers. But what we know about communities of color, they're much least likely to have, family wealth or access to opportunities to do that. And so it's definitely a huge opportunity. And I think it's not only from an access to capital standpoint, but it goes back to the relationship and activities that happen with you with Prosper. Is like, I need to be able to talk with a Fred Atiamo, somebody who can help me understand not only a loan, but also like be able to push back and be like, maybe you don't need a loan right now. Maybe if you go do this thing for 2 more years, you'll be in a better position to go and acquire a building instead of doing a long-term lease or whatever the case may be. And so where does that fabric come together so that people can talk about access to capital or access to social capital, which I think is the most important capital in the entrepreneurial world?
I heard an interview with the man that started the 4-Hour energy drink, and he was talking about not leaving any money to his child. And I remember being really like taken back by it. And he's like, he doesn't need money. He is my social capital. Every door in the world is open to him. And that has really come to shape my understanding of what my true privilege and wealth is. It's not the money in the bank. It's the people around me that I know. It's those opportunities. It's those connections. Something were to happen to me, I've got people I know that would help my kids find mentorship, or that's the gold right there. It's community.
For sure. And we see it in our kids. When COVID started, our oldest, she could have done a lot of things with the free time she had in her hands. She decided to start a business, right? And,
that's so cool.
I know that was because she hung out with me at Pencil, and she met all of these entrepreneurs that looked like her, and so it was just a natural thing to be like, oh, I got some time. I'll do this business. I love clothing. I love the business side of things. Let me see what I can come up with.
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh man. You talked a little bit about the state level, and I know that you are serving on the governor task force. You just came from a meeting there from downtown. What are you hoping to accomplish, and what are your hopes for this?
I think the biggest thing to come out of it, honestly, is going to be the social capital, where people having these conversations right now, this is all leading into recommendations that'll happen at the Oregon Business Summit in December, but this is going to need, a lot longer legs than December. And so what I'm hoping is this dozens of people that are coming together now are going to continue to come together in different form and fashion to come up with ideas that we need to help, address what's going on downtown, while also being realistic, right? Like, we were talking about it a little bit before coming on air, like, how we look at downtown has changed over time, and how businesses look at, the importance of having their employees downtown has changed over time. And also there's other parts of the region that have also gotten better. And so how do we embrace that? Wow, Vancouver's got an amazing waterfront. Wow, City of Beaverton is doing some amazing things with their downtown. What's the opportunity for us with our central city? And so, I hope that includes things like a James Beard something focused on food and CPG. I think that's one of the things that the guy's from here, right? He grew up in Portland. And so, what are those unique things that we know we can leverage here in Portland and do it in a positive way? I mean, I think one of the things I'm really excited about with Portland is seeing all the people that are just like, all right, I'm ready to roll up my sleeves. Yeah. We may not be number one on whatever list, and the people that were chasing to be on whatever number one list, they're now at that number one city. But the people that we're left with are the people that they love this town and they want to see us be the best version of it. And the more I travel, the more I appreciate Portland and what we have here. Like Rick Trozy says, like we're big enough to be a city, but small enough to where one person can make a difference.
Absolutely.
And so I'm looking forward to seeing how the people on the task force and beyond, because there's a ton of other tables already doing amazing work, continuing to make a difference here in the city.
I'm wondering, you're sitting right now as the director for a Business for Better Portland. Yeah. Why not just join the Portland Business Association? And how do these two organizations differ? Because I know for myself as a business person, been members of both, I have a hard time distinguishing like where should my energy go?
I think for the Portland Metro Chamber, one, we agree on more things than we disagree on. Full stop. Andrew and I get together. He's a wonderful human being. That being said, I think there's room in our city for more viewpoints around business than just the Portland Metro Chamber. Primarily, a lot of their viewpoints are larger businesses. And I think there's a lot of room for locally owned small businesses, retail-based businesses that aren't in the central city downtown to be able to have a voice and a perspective on what's going on in the city. And so, if I'm running a business out in Rockwood or I'm running a business in Cully, I don't know if the Portland Metro Chamber is really speaking for that community, as opposed to, that's our core audience as well. And then I think the other thing that kind of separates us is we're focused on like, what's the stuff we can do today? Like, yeah, I can go and talk in Salem and talk to the mayor, but like, oh, you've got a new business that just opened up downtown. All right, I can bring our members to come and shop at your cafe on a slow day, or on your grand opening. And so we do an event called Thinking Local, where we just get people to come downtown every month and we buy out a small business for, a couple of hours. And it's a way for people to engage, but it's also a way for a business owner to get some business on a day that otherwise may be pretty slow.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah. I think of our work as like Tony Gwynn, right? So Tony Gwynn, greatest hitter ever in baseball. You can't tell me otherwise, but if you needed a home run, he was going to hit you a single. If you needed a single, he was going to hit you a single. He wasn't going to strike out. So we're trying to do a lot of singles and have fun while we're doing it. We need Portland Metro Chamber. We need Business for a Better Portland. We need all the other organizations out there, fighting for the people that are making amazing things.
What one bit of advice would you give to business owners listening to this today?
Persist, press on. I think the folks that are in business today, they've been through a lot. And the folks that are making it, it's because they have a network of other founders that are supporting them. We've got, Emma from Wild Thing. We've got a button that's called the Emergency Beer Club pin, right? And so, it's generally other founders that are helping you see through things. And I think you just got to persist. Let's make it another quarter, another month. The small businesses that I think about are the ones that are the identity of Portland, right? Like, you don't go on a date to Target, do selfies at, Costco, right? You go on a date to get donuts at, wherever you want to go. I don't want to pick favorites.
You just really went into real tricky territory.
Exactly.
The donut war here in Portland is real.
Donut war is real. I think you just got to keep on putting one foot in front of the other. And it's so thankless at times. And I think, I think founders are in a really good spot because they've been through a lot already. Mm-hmm. And a lot of what they've seen in the last 2 years is not it's a different variation of what they've already been going through. I think I would want to speak to people that aren't founders and go and say, it's not venture capital. It's not going to be a bank that saves things. Like the biggest money is actually us, right? Mm-hmm. So like where you choose to have dinner or buy your coffee, it really matters. In Portland, we spend $7.3 million every day on food.
Wow.
$7.3 million every day, right? And for most of us, that's 3 or 4 chances throughout the day to make an impact. And that's not new money. And this isn't even people visiting here. Mm-hmm. It's people that live here. We spend over $7 million every day. So imagine if we went and said, oh, we know this data from Eco Northwest that Fridays are the slowest day in downtown. We're going to go and make sure when we spend that $7 million on Friday, we're going to spend as much as we can downtown. Mm-hmm. Right? And that goes really far. And that's not innovative, and Fast Company probably won't write about that. But that's where the big money really is, and that's where the impact really happens.
Takes me back to Brian's Excellence Award, where he was like, if you insist on having cheap food, it means you don't care about the quality of the ingredients, and you don't care what the people there are making and how they're treated. I think examining our habits and also examining just how much actual responsibility we do have. And another beautiful example of that is a good friend of mine. I know you know Sue Embry. Mm-hmm. And she was like, I'm going to do this radical act. I'm just going to take people for tours in my neighborhood because I know the data that people, when they're thinking about Portland, they actually have really good feelings about their own personal neighborhood. They feel safe there. They've seen that things come back alive. But then they talk about other neighborhoods so disparagingly. So she lived at the time in the Pearl, and she was just inviting people to come take a walk with me.
Yeah. It's amazing what you're able to accomplish when you just shift someone's perspective, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a new policy, but just shifting someone's perspective. I run an event monthly called The Gathering. And it's the last Wednesday of the month, Black men get together, and we get together at Oliver Twist in the Pearl. Mm-hmm. And we've been doing it 12 years. And it's fascinating. A lot of the gentlemen that go haven't been to the Pearl. And sometimes we're like, well, this is kind of a ritzy part of town. Like, should we really be here? Blah, 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 blah. And I was like, well, here's the interesting thing. This was the first Black community in Portland was the Pearl, right? It was the only place we ever got to choose. The first Black businesses and Black churches were all in the Pearl. And also, it's the only neighborhood in Portland named after a Black woman. Like, where else should we be? And then it clicks for them. They're like, well, hell yeah, we're here. But secretly, we're there because it's really centrally located and it's an amazing spot. But yeah.
Actually, thanks for bringing up the Pearl too. I mean, that it is actually the most economically diverse neighborhood in Portland. And I'd love to point that out when people talk about not in my backyard, affordable housing. It's like everybody thinks the Pearl is the shishiest, nicest, but it's actually also the most economically diverse. So
it is, but it's also a vast. There's a broad array of experiences in the Pearl, right? And I want to always be thinking about how do we help the person that owns multiple condos in the Pearl feel just as home as the person who's struggling to pay their rent or maybe currently, facing houselessness. Mm-hmm. How do we make sure that everyone on that continuum is feeling like Portland is a place for them? And I think that's the moment that we find ourselves in right now is there's some people that are saying Portland's seen better days. There's some people that are like, no, the best days are ahead. How do we have some sort of shared North Star of hey, we're all going to fight for Portland. And we're all going to, think about all Portlanders while we're doing that.
Thank you. Stephen, thanks for coming on to the Joypunk podcast today. And where can our listeners find you?
You can find me on Instagram or Twitter or X. I guess it's called X now. PDX Stephen G is my handle on both of those. And then if you ever want to hit me up and grab tea or coffee, you can just shoot me an email at steven@bbpdx.org.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all the work you do for our business community, for our city. You showing up wherever you show up, I just want you to know it means a lot to all of us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming. Thanks again to Stephen Green for the generous conversation and his positive presence in the Portland community. Make sure you hit him up for that coffee conversation. We're going to be taking a break for the holiday season, but we will be back with a fresh set of episodes with inspiring folks come the first of the year. This year for the holidays, I'm hoping you'll write us a review on Apple Podcasts and share your favorite episodes with those you love. Enjoy, Jenelle.